I still remember the first time I saw her. It was at the Pacific Northwest Regional Food Festival, and I was serving as a judge for the appetizer competition. Olivia's table stood out, not just because of her vibrant plating, but the way she transformed a simple Northwestern staple into something that told a story. While other chefs were focused on technical showmanship, she'd created an emotional experience on a plate. I gave her dish the highest marks, and when the crowd dispersed, I found myself lingering at her station. The way her eyes lit up when she talked about food, it was like watching someone speak their soul's language. We exchanged numbers under the pretense of quote, 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 quote. That night, over drinks at a small bar overlooking the Willamette River, we talked until the staff started stacking chairs. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, from flavor profiles to childhood memories to dreams we'd kept tucked away. I told her about my passion for connecting food to heritage, how I'd always imagined a restaurant that honored traditions while creating new ones. She shared her vision of becoming a voice in the culinary world, making fine dining concepts accessible to everyday home cooks. 3 years later, we were married in a small ceremony at a vineyard just outside Portland. We wrote our own vows, and I promised to support her dreams as if they were my own. I meant every word. Portland's culinary scene was competitive but vibrant, the perfect place for us to build our life together. I took a position as culinary director for the Heartwood Restaurant Group, overseeing 4 successful establishments across the city. The salary was solid, the benefits were good, and most importantly, it gave Olivia the financial cushion to build her blog, Olivia's Kitchen Tales. I'd come home after 14-hour days to find her perfecting recipes in our kitchen, flour dusting her cheeks, camera equipment scattered across our dining table. "Try this," she'd say, feeding me a spoonful of whatever she was working on. I'd offer suggestions, a touch more acid, perhaps a different herb, and she'd nod thoughtfully, jotting notes in her recipe book. On weekends, I'd help her prep for photo shoots, chopping ingredients into perfect mise en place, wiping plates clean of smudges, holding reflectors to catch the best light. Those early days were exhausting but exhilarating. We were building something together, brick by brick. When her blog hit 10,000 followers, I surprised her with a professional camera. At 50,000, I converted our spare bedroom into a proper studio kitchen with optimal lighting. We celebrated each milestone together: her first paid sponsorship, her first television appearance on a local morning show, her first feature in a national food magazine. I beamed with pride watching her grow, even as I remained behind the scenes. "We're a team," she'd say, squeezing my hand under the table at industry events. "I couldn't do any of this without you." I believed her. Maybe that's why I didn't notice the subtle shifts at first. The changes came gradually, almost imperceptibly. It started when she hired Julian Waters as her photographer. He had an impressive portfolio of work with several prominent food publications and brought a sophisticated aesthetic to her content. I welcomed his expertise initially. His photography elevated her visual brand considerably, but soon their, quote, essential shooting days stretched longer and longer. "We're chasing the golden hour light," she'd explain when returning home well after sunset. "It's crucial for the mood of the autumn recipes." When I suggested joining one of their location shoots, there was always a reason why my presence would disrupt the creative flow. "Too many cooks," she'd say, with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You know how it is." I'd nod and smile, ignoring the twist of unease in my stomach. As Olivia's following grew, 100,000 followers, then 150,000, our dynamics at social events began to shift as well. At industry dinner parties, where we'd once presented as equal partners with complementary expertise, she began referring to my culinary approach as quote, 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 conventional. Words that in our world carried the subtle sting of irrelevance. "Mason is brilliant with technique," she'd say to influential food critics, her hand resting lightly on my arm, "but I'm trying to push boundaries." I'd smile through these moments, telling myself she was simply positioning her brand. After all, wasn't that what I wanted? For her to succeed? Meanwhile, our late-night conversations about someday opening our own restaurant together, our shared dream, gradually disappeared from our interactions. When I'd bring it up, she'd nod distractedly. Eventually, she'd say, but timing is everything in this industry. Then would come a pivot to her more immediate concerns: an upcoming cookbook proposal, a potential television opportunity, a collaboration with a major cookware brand. I found myself doing more household management and behind-the-scenes support work, often testing recipes that would appear on her blog without attribution. My role was shifting from partner to support staff, and though I couldn't articulate it clearly then, I felt myself becoming increasingly invisible, both in her content and in our relationship. During those months, I poured my creative energy into planning for her 32nd birthday, determined to create an evening that would remind us of our connection. I wanted it to be perfect, a celebration not just of her, but of us, of the journey we'd taken together. I secured the private rooftop at Skyvine, Portland's most exclusive restaurant, with panoramic views of the city lights and Mount Hood in the distance. I worked secretly with their executive chef, arranging for rare heirloom ingredients from Olivia's hometown to be incorporated into a custom tasting menu. I commissioned a spectacular cake featuring edible replicas of her most popular dishes crafted in sugar and chocolate. I even flew in her favorite pastry chef from Paris, a huge expense that required dipping into my personal savings, but I knew it would delight her. Most significantly, I'd been saving for years to purchase a small restaurant space in an up-and-coming neighborhood. It needed work, but had enormous potential: exposed brick walls, high ceilings, a charming courtyard garden. It was perfect for the intimate, heritage-focused restaurant we'd always dreamed of opening together. I'd finalized the purchase just days before her birthday, planning to present her with the deed at the celebration. The night of the party, everything seemed magical at first. 60 influential food industry professionals filled the rooftop space: magazine editors, restaurateurs, fellow influencers, potential sponsors. Olivia looked stunning in a deep blue dress that caught the light as she moved through the crowd. I watched with pride as she worked the room, her laughter carrying over the ambient music, her presence magnetic. After the main course, I gave a heartfelt toast about her talent, her vision, and her determination. I spoke about our journey together, about how privileged I felt to be by her side as she pursued her dreams. The crowd raised their glasses, and Olivia kissed me lightly on the cheek before taking the microphone. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," she began, her voice confident and clear. "This past year has been transformative for me professionally and personally." She went on to thank her team, her agent, her publisher, her social media manager, and then, conspicuously, Julian, who helps me see myself and my work through new eyes. She didn't mention my name once, a small thing, perhaps, but in that moment it felt like a hollow opening in my chest. Then she smiled brightly. "And now, I have a special presentation to make." She beckoned me forward, and Julian appeared with a large gift box. The room quieted in anticipation. "Mason," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent rooftop, "you've been with me through so much of my journey, and now I want to give you something to mark this new chapter in our lives." I opened the box, expecting? I'm not sure what I expected. Inside was a chef's coat, professionally embroidered with my name on the front. I started to smile, deeply touched by what seemed like acknowledgement of my culinary identity. Then I lifted it fully from the box and turned it around, as Olivia indicated I should. There, embroidered across the back in bold black letters, was a single word: divorced. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then came uncomfortable laughter, spreading through the crowd like a wave. I stood frozen, the coat hanging from my hands, as the reality of what was happening began to register. This wasn't a private discussion. This wasn't even a difficult conversation at home. This was a performance, with me cast as the unsuspecting fool. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Olivia speaking again, something about authentic journeys and new chapters, but the words didn't fully register. My eyes found Julian in the crowd, his camera raised, capturing my humiliation in real time. The red recording light seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. I carefully folded the chef's coat and placed it back in its box. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope containing the deed to the restaurant space. Months of planning, years of saving, a future I had imagined for us. I placed it on the table without a word and walked out. No one tried to stop me. Outside, Portland's characteristic rain had started, a gentle, persistent mist that slowly soaked through my suit as I walked aimlessly through the darkened streets. The restaurant deed was still clutched in my hand, the paper growing damp. With each step, the reality settled deeper. The life I believed in, the partnership I had devoted myself to, had been nothing more than a performance. I had been cast in a role without my knowledge, and now my part had come to an end. Have you ever had that moment where your entire reality shifts beneath your feet? Where everything you thought was true suddenly reveals itself as carefully constructed fiction? I'd love to hear in the comments if you've experienced something similar. That shocking moment when the story you thought you were living suddenly reveals itself as something entirely different. That night, I found myself at Nico's apartment. We'd been friends since culinary school, and though our busy lives meant we saw each other less frequently than we once had, he remained the person I trusted most. He opened the door, took one look at me standing there drenched and shell-shocked, and wordlessly poured 2 glasses of whiskey. We sat in silence for a long time before I could speak. The next morning, Olivia called repeatedly, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Instead, I returned to our apartment while she was out to pack some essentials. That's when I found it, a sleek black portfolio left open on her desk. Inside was a detailed marketing deck titled Authentic Transitions, Leveraging Personal Evolution for Brand Growth. The document outlined a comprehensive strategy for transitioning her brand narrative from, quote, coupled chef to empowered solo culinary voice. It included a content calendar, partnership opportunities, and talking points for interviews about her, quote, brave new chapter. My heart stopped when I saw the timeline. This had been in planning for over 8 months. There were notes about the optimal timing for maximum impact on her cookbook release, projections for follower growth based on the, quote, authenticity of her journey, even mock-ups of Instagram posts featuring her post-relationship glow-up. The birthday announcement had been meticulously choreographed for maximum engagement. My reaction, my pain, had been anticipated and factored in as content. As I flipped through the pages, I discovered something even more devastating. Julian had been more than her photographer and, quote, creative director. Notes referred to him as her transition partner, with strategies for gradually introducing him to her audience as her new romantic interest. There were even discussions about how to handle potential, quote, audience attachment to Mason and messaging to ensure she maintained the, quote, empathy advantage in the public narrative. Further investigation revealed they'd been systematically copying my recipe files and notes for months. Recipes I'd developed, dishes that reflected my heritage and personal history, had been repackaged as her creations for the upcoming cookbook. Meanwhile, Julian had apparently been staying in our home during my frequent business trips overseeing restaurant openings in other cities. The depth and calculation of the betrayal left me physically ill. I sat on our bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of their deception, struggling to breathe, struggling to reconcile the woman I had loved with the person who could orchestrate something so cold. Have you ever discovered someone was using your loyalty against you? Someone who viewed your love as simply a stepping stone for their ambitions? Share your experience in the comments below, and let's support each other through betrayal. You're not alone in this experience. The following week passed in a blur. On Nico's advice, I contacted Diana Winters, a tough divorce attorney known for handling high-profile splits in the restaurant industry. In our first meeting, she listened impassively to my story, occasionally making notes. When I finished, she looked up with steely determination. "They've made a critical mistake," she said. "They documented everything." She instructed me to gather all evidence. The marketing deck, emails, text messages, financial records showing my contributions to Olivia's career, and most damning, the video footage from the birthday party, which had already begun circulating in industry circles. With Diana's guidance, I froze our joint accounts and began the process of legally disentangling my life from Olivia's. The mechanics of dissolution provided a strange comfort. Concrete tasks to complete, papers to file, a process to follow. Meanwhile, Olivia's carefully orchestrated narrative began rolling out across her platforms. She posted carefully filtered photos gazing thoughtfully into the distance, accompanied by long captions about, quote, outgrowing relationships and, quote, honoring her authentic self. She gave an exclusive interview to a popular food podcast, discussing her, quote, courage to restart, conveniently leaving out the public humiliation she'd orchestrated. Her followers rallied around her, offering support and praise for her, quote, bravery. I remained silent publicly, following Diana's advice to let the legal process unfold without adding fuel to the social media fire. In private, though, I was falling apart and rebuilding simultaneously. During those first weeks at Nico's, I barely slept. I'd lie awake, replaying moments from our marriage, second-guessing every interaction, wondering how I could have been so blind. By day, I went through the motions. I took a leave of absence from work, citing personal circumstances. I began running in the mornings, pounding the rain-soaked trails of Forest Park until my legs burned and my mind quieted. The physical exertion became my therapy, each step a way to process the anger, the shame, the grief. Gradually, I found my way back to cooking. Not the precise technical cooking of my professional life, but intuitive, emotional cooking. In Nico's modest kitchen, I reconnected with flavors from my childhood. My grandmother's carnitas that simmered all day, filling the apartment with the scent of cumin and citrus, my grandfather's grilled fish with herbs he'd grown himself. Simple street foods that had comforted me growing up. I cooked without recipes, without measuring, without thinking about presentation or how it would photograph. I cooked to remember who I was before Olivia, to find the parts of myself I had set aside. About a month after the separation, an unexpected opportunity arose. Layla Chang and Parker Wilson, two young restaurateurs developing an innovative farm-to-table concept, approached me through Nico. They'd heard I was between projects and wanted my input on their menu development. Initially, I agreed just to have something to focus on besides my collapsing personal life. Their concept was compelling. They were creating direct partnerships with small local farmers, with a menu that would change not just seasonally, but responsively to what was being harvested each week. Their passion was infectious, their vision uncomplicated by ego or social media metrics. Working with them in their test kitchen, I felt a spark of joy return to my cooking. As our collaboration deepened, they asked if I'd consider coming on as a partner rather than just a consultant. "We need someone with your experience and connections," Layla said. "Someone who understands both the creative and operational sides." "And honestly," Parker added, "we love how you think about food, like it's a conversation between the past and present." For the first time in years, I felt truly seen from my culinary perspective, rather than as a support system for someone else's vision. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings moved forward. Diana proved formidable, using the documentary evidence to secure a favorable settlement. The cookbook became a particularly contentious issue. With proof that many recipes were my creations, Olivia's publisher grew nervous about potential legal complications. Diana negotiated a settlement that included proper attribution and a percentage of royalties, though the documentation of Olivia's calculated plan became a powerful bargaining chip that ultimately worked in my favor across all aspects of our settlement. 6 months after the birthday disaster, I was transformed, both physically from my daily running routine and mentally from the process of rediscovering my own voice. My partnership with Layla and Parker had evolved into a full commitment to their restaurant, now named Fieldstone. We found a location in a former industrial space in southeast Portland, with high ceilings, exposed beams, and large windows overlooking a community garden. We designed an open kitchen where diners could watch their food being prepared, with a central hearth that became the heart of the restaurant. For our soft opening, I created a dish that I called simply Rebirth, a deconstructed version of a traditional family recipe, reimagined with ingredients sourced entirely from within 50 miles of Portland. The complexity of flavors, bitter, sweet, sour, umami, created a journey that evolved with each bite, ending with an unexpected note of hope in the form of tender spring herbs. When a food journalist from the Oregonian asked about the inspiration, I hesitated, then decided to share a version of my story. I spoke about loss, betrayal, and the process of rediscovering my culinary voice. I talked about how cooking had always been my way of processing emotion, and how this dish represented my journey from bitterness to possibility. The article, titled "From Betrayal to Rebirth, Chef Mason Reynolds Finds New Purpose," went viral beyond Portland's food community. Something about the story of personal and professional reinvention resonated with readers far beyond those interested in the latest restaurant opening. The response was overwhelming. Emails, messages, and letters from people sharing their own stories of betrayal and recovery. Many mentioned how food had been their comfort or their pathway back to themselves. This unexpected connection inspired me to start hosting small workshops called Nourishing After Loss, teaching cooking as a form of therapy. These intimate Sunday sessions quickly became the most fulfilling part of my week, watching people find confidence and healing through the simple act of creating food in community. Meanwhile, Olivia's carefully planned, quote, brand evolution wasn't unfolding as she'd anticipated. The full video of the birthday humiliation had circulated widely, and public opinion had shifted dramatically against her. The calculated nature of the spectacle struck many as unnecessarily cruel. Her cookbook sales faltered when food blogs began discussing the attribution controversy. Several major brand partnerships quietly opted not to renew their contracts. And Julian, true to form, abandoned her when a more prominent influencer offered him an opportunity in Los Angeles. A year after the betrayal, Fieldstone had become one of Portland's most talked about restaurants. We'd received recognition in national publications and had a 2-month waiting list for reservations. The success allowed me to finally revisit my original restaurant dream. I used my portion of the divorce settlement to purchase a small space not far from the original location I'd found for Olivia's birthday gift. I named it Reconstructed, a double meaning that wasn't lost on those who knew my story. The concept was intimately personal. Each dish told part of my journey, combining elements of my heritage with techniques and ingredients that represented different chapters of my life. The restaurant became not just a culinary success, but a symbolic space for people in the process of rebuilding their lives. Guests would often share their own stories of transformation after dining there, creating a unique atmosphere of authentic connection. Then came the evening I'd both dreaded and perhaps subconsciously anticipated. I was in the kitchen at Reconstructed during a busy service when my sous chef nudged me. "She's here," he said quietly. I didn't need to ask who she was. Olivia was seated at a corner table, watching me work. Her social media presence had diminished considerably over the past year, her carefully curated image tarnished by the revelation of her calculated cruelty. She looked different, less polished, more authentic somehow. I continued cooking, focused on each dish, each plate, each detail. After service, I knew she was still there. I took a deep breath and walked to her table. "The food was extraordinary," she said softly. "You've really found your voice." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by how steady I felt. "I have. I made a mistake, Mason. A terrible mistake." She reached for my hand, but I gently stepped back. "The mistake wasn't ending our marriage," I said. "It was how you chose to do it and why. You saw me as a character in your story rather than a person with my own." She looked down. "I know, I got caught up in building my brand and lost sight of what was real. I've lost everything that actually mattered." I felt no satisfaction in her regret, only a peaceful certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. "I hope you find your way back to what's real," I said. "Food has always been honest that way. It either nourishes or it doesn't. There's no performance that can change that fundamental truth." After she left, I returned to the kitchen and continued the nightly clean-down ritual with my team. As I wiped down the counters and checked inventory for the next day, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me here. The public humiliation that had once felt like the end of my world had ultimately freed me to build something authentic, both professionally and personally. I had found my voice, my purpose, and my community. Sometimes I marvel at how differently life can turn out from what we expect. That night at Skyvine, standing stunned with a divorced chef's coat in my hands, I couldn't have imagined finding gratitude in that moment of betrayal. Yet here I was, running 2 successful restaurants that truly reflected my culinary vision, hosting workshops that helped others heal through food, and recently beginning a relationship with someone who saw me clearly and valued me authentically. If you found strength in my journey, from betrayal to triumph, make sure to subscribe to Levitt Daily for more powerful stories of resilience. Hit that notification bell to never miss how ordinary people transform their deepest pain into extraordinary purpose. The truth is, we don't get to choose when life will break us open. We only get to choose what we create from the breaking. In my case, it was a feast built on the foundations of loss, more abundant and nourishing than I could have imagined.